flag on Fifth Avenue. If you were a pedestrian walking down the crowded gray sidewalks of Fifth Avenue in New York City during the late 1920s or the sweltering summers of the 1930s, your experience would have been an assault on the senses. You would be surrounded by the roar of early automobile engines, the sharp clatter of leather-soled shoes on concrete,
Extra, extra! Read all about it! Heat wave hits the city!
the shouts of newsboys on street corners,
Extra,
and the
extra!
thick
Read
scent
all
of
about
coal
it!
smoke and roasted nuts. This was Manhattan at its most electric, a city aggressively building upward, intoxicated by its own wealth and modernity. But if you paused near 69 Fifth Avenue, right around the cross streets of the city's bustling garment and publishing districts, your eyes would eventually be drawn away from the glamorous store awnings, the sleek glass shop windows, and the colorful corporate banners. You would look up toward the second story of a relatively unassuming brick building, and there you would see it, hanging completely flat against the stone facade, casting a long, sharp shadow over the luxury consumers below, was a flag. It wasn't the Stars and Stripes.
What do you
It
make of
bore
that?
no vibrant colors.
It's truly wonderful.
It was a massive, simple piece of heavy, coarse cotton cloth. It had a deep, midnight black background that seemed to absorb the New York sunlight. And stitched onto it in stark, unyielding, white block letters was a sentence that stopped people dead in their tracks. It read simply, "A man was lynched yesterday."
That's right! Continuous celebration!
Every single time a human being was captured, tortured, and murdered by a vigilante mob anywhere on American soil, the staff at the national headquarters of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, would quietly walk over to their front window. They would unbolt the frame, slide the glass open to let the city noise in, and unroll that heavy black banner. The flag never featured a name. It never listed a victim's age. It never stated the city, the town, or the state where the crime had taken place. It didn't need to, because the message it carried wasn't merely a localized news report. It was a grim, recurring public bulletin announcing a terrifying, ongoing American reality. It was a declaration that beneath the shiny veneer of 20th century American progress and constitutional law, a parallel system of lawless savagery was operating with total impunity. For years, I have stared at the surviving photographs of this flag in the deep stillness of historical archives. Even trapped in a digital scan or printed on yellowing paper, the image possesses a quiet, crushing gravity. In a strange way, it feels like it's looking back at you. When I look at it, I find my mind drifting away from the politics of the era and focusing on the human mechanics of that room. I find myself wondering about the specific individual whose job it was to maintain that flag. I think about them receiving the telegram in the morning, a short, coded message from a field secretary in Mississippi, or Georgia, or Indiana, detailing a midnight raid on a local jail. I imagine that person walking over to the closet, lifting the heavy bundle of dark fabric, and pulling the cord to lower that banner into the brisk New York breeze. What must it have felt like to lean out of that window? What went through their mind as they looked down at the sea of wealthy businessmen in tailored suits, tourists taking photos, and shoppers carrying bags from high-end department stores, knowing with absolute certainty that just hours prior, in some remote patch of woods or a crowded town square, a human life had been brutally, savagely snuffed out while the rest of the empire seamlessly went about its day? To the people on the street below, that flag was an uncomfortable mirror. To some, it was an embarrassment. To others, a life-saving warning. To us, looking back almost a century later, it is a roadmap. Today, we are going to trace the long, bloody history behind that flag. Because to truly understand the phenomenon of lynching in America, we have to look far past the myth of isolated rural crimes. We have to strip away the historical sanitization and see it for what it truly was: a highly organized, legally protected, and economically driven weapon of mass psychological terror. To truly understand why our society looks the way it does today, we have to look directly into the eyes of our past. We have to reckon with the names, the economics, the political complicity, and the sheer, breathtaking scale of what occurred right here on American soil.
In the shadow of Reconstruction,
a system of terror was born. But one woman refused to let the violence go undocumented. Ida B. Wells exposed the tools of terror. The way to right wrongs is to turn the light of truth upon them.
The foundations of terror in Ida B. Wells. To understand how this epidemic began, we have to look at the immediate aftermath of the American Civil War. When 4 million enslaved people were suddenly emancipated, the traditional social and economic hierarchy of the American South was shattered. During the era known as Reconstruction, Black Americans weren't just surviving, they were thriving. They were opening businesses, buying land, establishing schools, and electing Black senators and congressmen to Washington. But this progress was met with a violent, resentful counter-revolution. When federal troops withdrew from the South in 1877, white supremacist factions moved quickly to regain total control. They established Jim Crow laws to legally segregate society, but the law wasn't enough to completely break the spirit of Black independence. For that, they used extrajudicial violence. When we hear the word lynching, our minds almost instinctively picture a rope and an isolated tree in the woods. But lynching was never just about hanging. It was an extrajudicial execution carried out by a mob, designed to bypass the court system entirely and serve as a communal warning. Between 1877 and 1950, more than 4,400 Black men, women, and children were documented as victims of racial terror lynchings. But database numbers are sterile. They cannot convey the terror. The stories do. Let me take you to Memphis, Tennessee in the spring of 1892. 3 Black men, Thomas Moss, Calvin McDowell, and Will Stewart, opened a successful grocery store called the People's Grocery. It was an incredible success, serving as a beacon of Black economic independence. But its very existence angered a white grocery store owner across the street, who saw his monopoly slip away. Tensions escalated, and after a series of verbal and physical clashes,
Stand back! This is our property! Drop your weapons, you are under arrest! Welcome to Memphis jail, boys!
where the Black owners successfully defended their property, the 3 men were arrested and thrown into a Memphis jail. They never received a trial.
Break it down! Get the keys! Drag them out of here! Drag them out of here! Drag them down to the railroad yard!
In the dead of night, a heavily armed white mob stormed the jail, overpowered the guards, and dragged Moss, McDowell, and Stewart out to a nearby railroad yard.
No, please,
they were brutally tortured and shot to death. As Thomas Moss stood facing his executioners, his final words weren't a plea for
mercy.
Tell my
people to go west.
They were a message to his community.
There is nothing for them here.
Tell my people to go west. There is no justice here.
Tell my people to go west. There is no justice here.
Living in Memphis at that exact moment was a young, fiercely brilliant school teacher and journalist named Ida B. Wells. Thomas Moss was one of her closest friends. His murder completely devastated her, but it also shattered her understanding of American justice. I spent weeks reading through Wells's personal journals and investigative pamphlets, like Southern Horrors. What she did next was nothing short of miraculous. At a time when challenging white supremacy meant an automatic death sentence, Ida B. Wells became America's first investigative journalist. She traveled across the South, entering towns where lynchings had just occurred. She interviewed witnesses, gathered data, and dug into the official narratives. And she exposed the great American lie. The prevailing myth of the era, pushed by Southern politicians and newspapers, was that lynchings were spontaneous acts of frontier justice carried out to punish violent crimes or sexual assaults. But Wells proved, with cold, hard statistics, that this was a complete fabrication. In the vast majority of cases, Black people were lynched for economic or social infractions, for competing with white businesses, for demanding fair wages as sharecroppers, for failing to step off a sidewalk to let a white person pass.
You better move out of my way, boy.
Or simply for possessing too much self-respect. Lynching was an economic regulator disguised as moral outrage. Because of her writing, a white mob destroyed her newspaper office in Memphis while she was traveling.
Tear it all down, all down! Burn the papers!
If she ever returns, she will hang.
They warned her that if she ever returned, she would be hanged from a lamppost. She was exiled from her home, but she refused to be silenced. She took her findings to Chicago, to New York, and across the Atlantic to Great Britain, forcing the global community to look at the bloody reality of the American Republic. The era of spectacle and mass destruction.
As the United States marched into the 20th century, it embraced a new era of spectacle. But this progress carried the seeds of mass destruction.
As the United States marched into the 20th century, lynching underwent a grotesque evolution. It ceased to be a crime hidden in the dark corners of the night. It became a public ritual. It became what historians now call spectacle lynchings. These were massive, community-sanctioned events, openly advertised in local newspapers, alongside department store sales and church picnics. Let the gravity of this sink in. These were events where thousands of ordinary people, decent citizens, churchgoers, shopkeepers, mothers, and young children, gathered together in broad daylight to watch human beings be tortured and murdered.
I heard the whole county is coming. Yes, we should get a good view from here.
In 1893, in Paris, Texas, a black man named Henry Smith was accused of a crime without a shred of due process. A platform was constructed in the center of town. Special excursion trains were scheduled by railroad companies to bring in spectators from surrounding cities. A crowd estimated at 10,000 people gathered. School children were granted a district-wide holiday to attend. Henry Smith was tortured with red-hot iron brands for nearly an hour before being burned alive. 23 years later, in 1916, the horror repeated itself in Waco, Texas.
Bring him on! We're going to the courthouse! Move it! Get him moving now! Make way! We are taking over! Keep moving! No stopping now!
A 17-year-old black teenager named Jesse Washington, who suffered from severe mental disabilities, was accused of killing a white woman. After a brief trial inside a packed courtroom, a mob dragged Jesse out of the building. A chain was wrapped around his torso, and he was dragged through the streets to the public square, directly beneath the windows of the city hall. A crowd of 15,000 people watched as he was repeatedly lowered into a bonfire. Professional photographers set up tripods, snapping high-resolution images of his agonizing death. Those photographs weren't hidden away. They were printed onto postcards. White families bought them for a nickel, wrote casual messages to their relatives on the back, and dropped them in the United States mail. One surviving postcard from Waco reads, "This is the barbecue we had last night. My picture is to the left. Your loving son, Joe." People took home physical souvenirs. They fought over pieces of the victim's clothing, links of the chain, and even pieces of bone. This wasn't just a breakdown of law and order. It was a profound systemic moral collapse that infected entire generations of American citizens. And when individual terror wasn't enough to keep black communities subdued, it expanded into total, localized mass destruction. 1898, Wilmington, North Carolina. A thriving, politically organized black community had formed a successful fusion government with white populists.
This partnership is proof that we can build a better future together. Hear, hear.
In response, an armed white militia staged the only successful coup d'etat on American soil.
We are taking this town force! Get out and never come back! You can't expel the rightfully elected.
Murdering dozens of black citizens and forcing the elected government out of town at gunpoint. 1919, the Red Summer. To understand the sheer geographical reach of racial terror, we have to look at the blood-soaked months of 1919, a period history now remembers by a terrifying name coined by NAACP leader James Weldon Johnson, the Red Summer. This was not a localized wave of violence confined to the deep woods of the rural South. This was a nationwide conflagration, an explosion of racial violence that erupted in over 36 cities across the United States. Stretching from the Atlantic coast to the Midwest, The catalyst for this violence was deeply rooted in the global geopolitics of the era. World War I had just come to an end. Thousands of young black men had answered the call to serve their country, shipping off to Europe to fight in the muddy trenches of France. Serving in segregated units like the famous 369th Infantry, the Harlem Hellfighters, these men experienced something life-altering. They fought bravely for global democracy, and in places like France, they were treated with a level of dignity, respect, and basic human equality that they had never once experienced in their own homeland. When the war ended and these black veterans stepped off the ships back onto American soil, they did so with their heads held high. They marched through the streets of New York, Chicago, and Washington, D.C., still wearing their military uniforms, carrying their medals, and rightfully demanding the very democracy and civil rights they had just risked their lives to defend abroad. But their pride was met with an immediate violent backlash. To the guardians of white supremacy, a black man in a military uniform, carrying himself with dignity and self-respect, was an existential threat to the racial hierarchy.
These returning soldiers will become dangerous. They have been spoiled by European equality.
Southern politicians openly warned that these returning soldiers would become dangerous because they had been spoiled by European equality. The response from white mobs was immediate and brutal. Across the country, black veterans were targeted, beaten, and in several horrific instances, men were lynched while still wearing their United States military uniforms. By the summer of 1919, tensions boiled over into open urban warfare. In Washington, D.C., rumors of an arrest sparked a 4-day wave of violence as mobs of white soldiers, sailors, and civilians rioted through black neighborhoods, dragging people from streetcars and beating them. But this time, something changed. The black community, led heavily by those returning World War I veterans, organized, armed themselves, and fought back to defend their homes and families. Days later, the violence exploded in Chicago. A 17-year-old black teenager named Eugene Williams was swimming with friends in Lake Michigan. He accidentally drifted across an invisible, unspoken racial boundary into a section of the water traditionally reserved for white swimmers. A white man on the beach began hurling large rocks at the boys, striking Eugene, who slipped beneath the surface and drowned. When white police officers refused to arrest the man throwing the stones and instead arrested a black bystander, the city erupted. For nearly a week, white gangs raided black neighborhoods on the south side, setting fire to homes and attacking residents, leaving 38 people dead and over 500 injured. But perhaps the most devastating and heavily hidden atrocity of the Red Summer occurred in the rural, swampy lowlands of Elaine, Arkansas. In late September of 1919, a group of black sharecroppers, men and women who spent their lives performing backbreaking labor in the cotton fields for pennies, decided they had suffered enough. Under the leadership of a local tenant farmer named Robert Hill, they secretly gathered inside a small church in a settlement called Hoop Spur.
We are only trying to form a labor union.
They weren't plotting a violent rebellion. They were doing something completely legal. They were trying to form a labor union, the Progressive Farmers and Household Union of America.
We need a lawyer for a fair accounting.
But they will come for us.
Knowing the danger they faced,
Their goal was simple: to pool their resources, hire a lawyer, and demand a fair, transparent accounting of the cotton prices from the powerful white landowners who kept them trapped in a cycle of debt slavery. Knowing the danger they faced, the sharecroppers placed armed guards outside the church doors. Late into the night, a vehicle carrying a white deputy sheriff and a railroad security officer pulled up outside.
What's going on here?
You have no business here.
That's far enough. We're lawful officers.
Not tonight.
Sheriff's office! Hold it right there!
Shots were exchanged under a shroud of darkness, and the white officer was killed. The response was a localized campaign of complete extermination. Word spread like wildfire across the state that a black insurrection was underway. Within hours, thousands of armed white men from surrounding counties and even crossing the river from Mississippi poured into Elaine. They deputized themselves, forming a massive lawless militia.
They say a black insurrection is underway!
They hunted down black men, women, and children through the fields, the woods, and inside their homes, shooting them on sight. But the horror deepened when the governor of Arkansas called in federal troops. Over 500 heavily armed U.S. Army soldiers arrived in Elaine, bringing with them rapid-fire machine guns. Instead of restoring order and protecting the citizens, the troops actively joined the white mobs. They surrounded black residents, opened fire into the woods, and systematically slaughtered hundreds of sharecroppers over the course of 3 days. While the official white narrative at the time claimed only a handful of people died, extensive investigations by the NAACP and modern historians estimate that between 100 and 237 black people were massacred in Elaine. Not a single member of the white mobs or the military was ever charged with a crime. Instead, 79 black survivors were arrested, packed into crowded cells, tortured into giving false confessions, and 12 of them were swiftly sentenced to death by all-white juries in trials that lasted less than 10 minutes.
We fought for democracy abroad. Now we must fight for it, right here at home.
The Red Summer of 1919 proved a chilling point to the nation. It demonstrated that whether you were a decorated war hero in a major northern metropolis or a poor sharecropper in a rural southern town, any attempt to assert your humanity, your economic independence, or your constitutional rights would be met with the full, unchecked fury of the lynch mob. 1921, Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Get out of here right now! Go, go!
To understand the absolute peak of this destructive jealousy, we have to look 2 years after the Red Summer, to the late spring of 1921, in a booming oil town called Tulsa, Oklahoma. Just north of the city's downtown lay the neighborhood of Greenwood. At a time when segregation was the absolute law of the land, the black residents of Tulsa had built something miraculous. Because they were legally barred from spending their money in white-owned establishments, they created their own self-sustaining economy. They built a thriving, affluent community that became widely known across the country by a legendary moniker, Black Wall Street. Greenwood was a spectacular, defiant testament to black intelligence, resilience, and wealth. Along Greenwood Avenue, you could walk past luxury hotels with crystal chandeliers, elegant movie theaters, black-owned banks, clothiers, high-end restaurants, doctors' offices, and a state-of-the-art brick hospital. The residential streets were lined with beautiful, multi-story mansions owned by black entrepreneurs and oil barons. It was a place where a dollar bill would circulate within the community for nearly a year before ever leaving. But just across the railroad tracks, a deep, toxic resentment was festering among Tulsa's white working-class population. They looked at the prosperity of Greenwood not with admiration, but with an intense, radicalized envy. They believed that luxury, wealth, and systemic power belonged exclusively to them.
They think that luxury belongs to them. It is an insult to the natural order.
And that the very sight of a black family driving a luxury vehicle
That should be ours.
or owning a mansion was an insult to the natural racial order. All that was needed to ignite this powder keg was a spark, and that spark arrived on May 30th, 1921. A 19-year-old black shoe shiner named Dick Rowland entered the Drexel building downtown to use the only restroom available to black workers, which was located on the top floor. To get there, he stepped into an elevator operated by a 17-year-old white girl named Sarah Page. What happened next inside that enclosed elevator car remains a matter of historical debate. But the most likely scenario is that the elevator jerked, causing Rowland to trip and accidentally step on Page's foot or grab her arm to balance himself. She let out a startled scream. When the elevator doors opened, Rowland ran out in a panic. By the next morning, the local white newspaper, the Tulsa Tribune, had weaponized the incident, printing a sensationalized, completely fabricated front-page headline screaming that a black man had attempted to assault a white girl. There were even reports of an editorial in the same issue openly calling for a lynching. By that evening, a massive, angry white mob numbering in the thousands gathered outside the courthouse, where Dick Rowland was being held, demanding that the sheriff hand him over. Hearing rumors of an impending lynching, a group of roughly 75 armed black men, many of them proud World War I veterans wearing their old uniforms, marched down to the courthouse to offer their assistance to the sheriff to protect Rowland's life.
We are here to help. We will protect the prisoner. No one is taking him tonight.
The sight of armed black men standing up for justice sent the white mob into a frenzy. A confrontation occurred. A white man attempted to disarm a black veteran. A shot rang out in the darkness, and within minutes, a chaotic gun battle spilled out into the streets of Tulsa.
You're not leaving here alive! Stand back! This is our right! They're shooting! Get down! Take cover! Take cover!
Overmatched and outnumbered, the black defenders slowly retreated back across the tracks into Greenwood to protect their families.
Fall back across the tracks! We have to protect Greenwood! Fall back to our families! Fall back to the houses!
What followed over the next 12 hours was not a riot. It was a fully coordinated, military-style invasion. As the sun began to rise on the morning of June 1st, a whistle blew, and thousands of white rioters poured across the railroad tracks into Greenwood. But they weren't acting alone. Local law enforcement officials, completely overwhelmed and deeply complicit, did something unthinkable. They actively deputized members of the white mob. They handed out weapons, badges, and ammunition to ordinary citizens, explicitly instructing them to get a gun and get a Negro. The mob swept through Greenwood with terrifying precision. They moved from house to house, kicking in doors, driving families out into the streets at gunpoint, looting silver, jewelry, and family heirlooms, and then setting the structures ablaze with kerosene. But the ultimate horror of Tulsa, and what marks it as one of the most unique and devastating atrocities in civilized history, came from the sky. Wealthy white oil businessmen leased private single-engine biplanes from nearby airfields. They took to the air, buzzing low over the rooftops of Greenwood. From the cockpits, passengers dropped homemade turpentine firebombs and opened fire with high-powered rifles down onto the roofs of black homes, churches, and schools. It was the first time in American history that an American community was subjected to an aerial bombardment. By the time the smoke finally cleared and the governor declared martial law, 35 square blocks of Black Wall Street had been reduced to a smoldering landscape of ash and twisted metal. Over 1,200 homes were gone. Every single church, school, hospital, and business in Greenwood was destroyed. More than 10,000 black residents were left completely homeless, forced into heavily guarded internment camps set up by the government. The human toll was catastrophic. While initial official reports downplayed the casualties, modern forensic investigations and historical records reveal that up to 300 black people were systematically slaughtered during those horrific hours. To cover up the sheer scale of the massacre, bodies were hastily piled onto the backs of flatbed trucks and dumped into mass, unmarked graves throughout the city or thrown directly into the Arkansas River. Not a single white person was ever convicted of a crime for the destruction of Greenwood. The insurance companies refused to pay out a single penny to the black homeowners, citing riot clauses in their contracts. The memory of the event was systematically scrubbed from local newspapers, school textbooks, and official histories for over 50 years in an effort to enforce an absolute conspiracy of silence. The terror of Tulsa was total. It sent a chilling, unmistakable message that echoed from the plains of Oklahoma to every corner of the United States. It did not matter how hard a black American worked. It did not matter if you followed every law, acquired an education, built a business, or amassed a fortune. Under the rule of the lynch mob, your wealth, your property, and your very life could be utterly incinerated in a single night, because the system was designed to ensure that you could never truly be safe. The catalyst of Emmett Till. By the arrival of the 1950s, the era of massive 15,000-person spectacle lynchings had largely receded due to intense international pressure and the relentless anti-lynching campaigns led by the NAACP. But the underlying architecture of racial terror remained completely intact, waiting to be triggered. And in August of 1955, that trigger was pulled on a 14-year-old boy from the south side of Chicago who was visiting family in the small Delta town of Money, Mississippi. His name was Emmett Louis Till. Emmett was a city kid, unaccustomed to the rigid life-or-death codes of Jim Crow, Mississippi. While standing outside a local grocery store, he was accused of whistling at or speaking inappropriately to a 21-year-old white female shopkeeper named Carolyn Bryant.
Preacher! Preacher! We want that boy from Chicago.
The one who did the talking.
4 days later, in the deep pitch black of night, the woman's husband, Roy Bryant, and his half-brother, J.W. Milam, drove to the home of Emmett's great-uncle, Mose Wright. Armed with flashlights and pistols, they demanded the boy from Chicago. Despite Mose Wright's desperate offers of money,
Please, I've got money. Just let him go.
Stand back, old man. He's coming with us.
they forced Emmett into the back of a pickup truck and drove away. For hours, they tortured him.
You're in real trouble now.
They dragged him into a barn.
You're gonna learn your lesson.
Beat him with a pistol until one of his eyes was dislodged, shot him through the head, and then used barbed wire to lash a 75-pound industrial cotton gin fan around his neck. They dumped his naked, broken body into the muddy waters of the Tallahatchie River. When his body was pulled from the river 3 days later, it was so badly bloated and mutilated that his great-uncle could only identify him by a silver signet ring on his finger, bearing his father's initials. The authorities wanted to bury the body immediately in an unmarked Mississippi grave to cover up the crime. But his mother, Mamie Till Mobley, refused. She had her son's body shipped back to Chicago in a pine box. When it arrived, she looked into that casket, saw the unimaginable horror of what had been done to her only child, and made a decision that would permanently alter the course of human history.
I want the world to see what they did to my boy. They have to see the results of this hate. Let them see what I have seen. I have made my decision. We will let the world see what they did to my boy. This will not happen to another child. The world must see the truth.
She demanded an open casket public funeral. She gave strict instructions to the mortician not to use cosmetics to hide the damage. She famously stated, "Let the world see what I've seen. Let the world see what they did to my boy." Over 100,000 people filed past that casket at the Roberts Temple Church of God in Christ.
The whole world needs to see this.
Jet Magazine and the Chicago Defender published photographs of Emmett's face on their front pages. For the first time, the comfortable citizens of the North and the international community at large could not look away from the raw, unfiltered savagery of Southern white supremacy. It was an absolute turning point. Months later, when a seamstress named Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a segregated bus in Montgomery, Alabama, sparking the modern civil rights movement, she was asked why she didn't
Why
move
didn't
to
you
the
move
back.
to the back?
Her answer was simple.
I thought of Emmett Till, and I just couldn't go back.
Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam were put on trial in a segregated Mississippi courtroom.
There he
Mose
is.
Wright did
That's the
something
man.
of legendary bravery. He stood up on the witness stand, pointed his finger directly at
That
the
is
white
the
killers,
man.
and identified them. But it didn't matter. The all-white, all-male jury acquitted both men in less than an hour.
It only took that long because we stopped to drink a soda.
One juror later joked that it only took that long because they stopped to drink a soda. Just a few months later, protected by double jeopardy laws that prevented them from being tried twice, Bryant and Milam proudly sold the full, graphic confession of how they murdered Emmett Till to Look magazine for $4,000. Justice wasn't just blind in America, it was actively complicit.
They can't touch us no more.
Double jeopardy is a beautiful thing.
Every last detail for the whole world to read.
We walked out of that courtroom free men. Might as well get paid for it.
It is incredibly easy for us to relegate these events to the distant past. We like to look at black and white photographs and pretend that they belong to a completely different civilization, a closed chapter of a history we have outgrown. But history is not an artifact sitting quietly behind glass in a museum. It is a living, breathing current that directly shapes the topography of our present world. The ideology that fueled the lynch mobs of the 19th and 20th centuries did not vanish with the passage of the Civil Rights Act. It simply adapted. It changed its vocabulary. Let me bring you to June of 1998 in Jasper, Texas. A 49-year-old black man named James Byrd Jr. was walking home from a friend's anniversary party.
Hey man, you need a ride?
When he was offered a ride by three white men. Instead of taking him home, they drove him to a remote county road.
Get down on the ground! You're not going anywhere!
They beat him severely, spray-painted his face, tied his ankles to the bumper of a pickup truck with a heavy logging chain, and dragged him for 3 miles down a rough asphalt road. He was fully conscious for the majority of the ordeal until his body hit a concrete culvert, decapitating him. His killers were unrepentant white supremacists.
That didn't happen in 1898. It happened in 1998.
Let me bring you to February of 2020 in Brunswick, Georgia. A 25-year-old young black man named Ahmaud Arbery put on his running shoes and went out for a casual jog through a suburban neighborhood. Two white men, a father and son, saw him running,
Look at him running. He must have done something.
assumed without a single shred of evidence that he must be a criminal, grabbed a shotgun and a handgun, and pursued him in a pickup truck. A third neighbor joined the chase in his own truck, recording the encounter on a cell phone.
We got him
They
pinned!
trapped Ahmaud on a 2-lane road. When Ahmaud attempted to run around the truck to defend his life,
Give me the
he
gun!
was shot
Stop
to death
resisting!
at close range in the middle of the street.
2 months, no arrest! What do we want?
Justice! When do we want it?
Now!
For more than 2 months, local law enforcement authorities made absolutely no arrests. The district attorney's office explicitly advised against arrests, arguing that the killers were simply performing a justifiable citizen's arrest. It was only after that cell phone footage leaked online, sparking massive global outrage, that the state intervened, took the case away from local authorities, and secured a conviction. When the United States Department of Justice subsequently brought federal hate crime charges against Arbery's killers, the federal prosecutors stood up in court
Because the
and
defendant
explicitly
committed an
used the
act
word
that can
lynching.
only be described as a lynching.
The heavy hemp rope may have been replaced by a modern pickup truck or a high-caliber firearm, but the underlying psychological framework remains absolutely identical. It is the belief that ordinary citizens have the right to deputize themselves, act as judge, jury, and executioner.
He doesn't belong on our street. We make the rules here. You don't belong on this block.
I'm just walking home. We look after our own.
And destroy a black human being because they perceive his presence as a violation of their space.
You don't belong here!
On March 29th, 2022, nearly 130 years after Ida B. Wells launched her lonely, dangerous crusade, and after more than 200 previous attempts by the United States Congress to pass anti-lynching legislation had been systematically blocked or defeated, the President of the United States finally signed the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act into law.
For the very first time in American history, lynching was officially designated as a federal hate crime. Think about that timeline.
It took over a century of protest, a century of grief.
For the very first time in American history, lynching was officially designated as a federal hate crime. Think about that timeline. It took over a century of protest, a century of grief, and thousands of lost lives for the highest levels of American jurisprudence to formally outlaw the exact crime that black flag on Fifth Avenue was screaming out to the world every single day.
A man was lynched yesterday. We must come to understand that merely to engage in historical nostalgia or performative grief.
When we look back at that photograph from 1936, when we read those stark words, "A man was lynched yesterday," we must come to understand that our responsibility today is not merely to engage in historical nostalgia or performative grief. Our responsibility is to maintain an unyielding vigilance over our present. It is to recognize that the biases, the hatreds, and the extrajudicial impulses that carve deep scars into our past are constantly searching for modern avenues to rewrite our future. The next time you see a viral video, a shocking headline, or a quiet act of systemic injustice occurring within your own city or town, I want you to stop and ask yourself the hard question: have we truly dismantled that dark era? Or is that black flag still flying out the window?
If you believe that this history must be uncovered, remembered, and shared, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Let us keep searching for the truth together.